Hello, in this video I'll be making a late 18th century jacket from Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 1660 to 1865. I'm hoping to sew this jacket with the most historically accurate methods I can, and for the making of the jacket I used a calico lining and a yellow tartan cotton, brushed cotton fabric for the outer layer. Even though this is modern fabrics I'm using, I am still hoping that based on my research this can be done as best as I can to follow what an 18th century jacket would have looked like. This jacket is an informal jacket and would be dated from around 1770 to 1775. Even though these kind of jackets were worn by women all across society at this time, the type of jacket that I'm making today would have been worn more typically by either a lower middle class woman or a working class woman. These type of jackets arose around the 1730s. Their skirted shape mimicked those of men's jackets of the time. Now, even though these jackets kind of appeared around the 1730s, they were popular throughout the better part of the 18th century. So you'd see them 1730s, 1740s, 1750s, 1760s, 1770s, and just all kinds of women wore them, regardless of their class. And of course, based on where you were in the class structure, or at least how closely you followed fashions of the time, that would really affect the kind of fabrics you would have used for these kind of jackets. Someone from, say, the upper class would have used very luxurious silk brocades, whereas someone on the lower class would have used probably more easier, cheaper to find cottons. Well, now, looking at this pattern, you can see it features flying cuffs, which, based on my research, did seem to go out of fashion around the 1750s, I'd say. Now, just because these went out of fashion in the mid-18th century doesn't mean to say that they just stopped existing entirely. If you look at some gowns from the 1770s, even silk gowns that would have been owned by more middle-class to upper-class women, some of them do still feature these flying cuffs, though of course they are notably much closer to the sleeves than they would have been around the mid-18th century. And of course, regardless of where you were in the class structure, whether you're upper class, middle class, working class, really the way your clothes appeared did depend on really just your own taste when it came to fashion. So, you know, you could be upper class, but you didn't necessarily have to be obsessed with fashion. Like, you could just have your clothes really made however you wanted them to be, because at this time the way that people had their clothes was they'd go to a local dressmaker and their local dressmaker would make their clothes for them. It would be made using the fabrics that the wearer wanted to wear and sewn or cut and sewn to the measurements of the wearer's body. So really what this allowed for was that clothes were much more personal to the individual who would have worn them. Now, when I began making this jacket, I began with taking my bodily measurements, which is what a dressmaker of the time would have been doing, and I used these measurements to draft them onto the lining fabric. Now, this would have been done by dressmakers of the time, however, it would have been done in a different way to the way that I did it. See, what I did was I drafted the pattern pieces directly onto the fabric whilst it was laid out on the floor as a flat surface, whereas if I was an 18th century dressmaker, what I would have done, I would have draped the lining pieces onto the wearer's body and cut them that way. Now see, I can't really drape pieces directly onto my body, or at least, well, if I could, I don't think I've really got the skill set to do that yet. So what I did is I draped them directly onto the floor, which made it a bit easier for me to do, and well, really just made a slightly easier process for me to do. And then after that I proceeded to cut out the pieces, and then I used the lining pieces as a template to cut out the outer pieces of the tartan fabric, which would have been done at the time, as dressmakers cut out lining pieces first and used that as a template to cut out the outer pieces, because that way, when they were cutting out the dress pieces, they didn't necessarily have to damage the outer pieces with the risk of getting it wrong as they made it. Once I had all the pieces cut out, what I did was I base stitched the lining and outer fabric pieces together, and what this did was it held them close together as a temporary solution, which also would have been done at the time, and it made it a lot easier to sew them together. The next step would have been to turn the raw edges of the pieces inwards and sew them closed. This would have kept the raw edges away, it would have kept them from getting damaged and worn down over time of years of being worn. And then of course the next step was of course to sew them closed. And of course the next step would have been to sew the fabric pieces together in order to construct the jacket. After that, I went over all the raw edges, all along the neckline, hem, sleeve cuffs, just to make sure that they weren't raw, making sure they were all covered up as they would have been done at the time. And then of course, by the end of it, I had a jacket, which was really, really cool to see come together. So I hope you will like the jacket as much as I did. I know this isn't like the best video quality ever, but this is my first kind of foray into filming myself on camera for YouTube, which is admittedly, if I can be quite honest, absolutely terrifying and nerve-wracking, but oh well, there's a first time for everything. So if you are still watching at this point, which thank you for watching it up until this point, don't forget to press subscribe and like the video if you can. Bye.